All right, welcome Amy Scott to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for asking. So I have you on as a financial coach, and I'm sure there's much more than just finance when you're dealing with those clients. Can you please tell the world what you do and how you can help them?
Sure. So, what I do is that I'm a financial coach. So, really, I help people to get their finances organized so that they can have confidence and peace of mind about the financial decisions they're making every day and have like a sense of really more confidence around that the choices they're making in the day to day are getting them to where they want to be down the road.
What do you see as like one of the biggest problems that when you get a new client, they come in? What
Mhm.
is one of the biggest issues that you see that they have? It could be overspending. It could be not having a budget at all. What's your take on that?
Well, there's three big ones, Michael, that I typically see across the board. And if people don't fall into all three, they typically will fall into at least one.
Mhm.
The first one is really an inability to save.
Mm.
So, and even if it's inability seems like a tricky word right there, but to me, that's we'd like to save, or I'd like to save, and we're not able to save as much as we'd like to. We have these grand ambitions at the beginning of the month. We think we're going to be able to save X, Y, and Z, and we get to the end of the month and it's a lot less. So, challenges around savings is number one. The second challenge that I see is folks who are in debt and can't seem to get out of it, or they're in and out of it. I like to call that yo-yo debt, right? So they get out of it, there's some kind of a windfall, a third paycheck, a tax refund, a bonus. And then because they haven't really got their finances organized, they're back into that yo-yo debt. And then
Mm.
the third one, to your point, is typically overspending, or folks who say, we can't stick to a budget. A budget is too challenging for me. Those are probably the three main challenges I see when clients come to me.
Mhm.
But to be honest with you, if you don't mind me saying this, I think those challenges are all symptoms of a bigger problem.
Mm.
People really think that that's the challenge. Like, oh, I'm in debt. I can't save. I overspend. I think the bigger problem is that we actually can't see our money clearly. And what I mean by that is our income and our expenses nowadays go through so many different channels. We may have some things set up on auto pay, other things we use a debit card for, other things we use a credit card for, but not that credit card, maybe this credit card, things that are quarterly expenses, annual expenses. So seeing the timing and the impact of the choices we make day to day is very challenging. So I think the
Mm.
biggest challenge overall is having financial clarity about really like a holistic view of your financial picture.
And you're 100% right there because we have different credit cards for different things. Someone will take a credit card just to go to Kohl's or J.C. Penney. So they have these credit cards and then say, oh, wait, I have to pay that. And it's a huge burden to remember. I have to pay all these credit cards. So people would have 6, 7 credit cards. That's a lot of credit cards. And I'm not bashing credit cards
Yeah.
because you can utilize credit cards for your gain by getting points, cash back. There's ways that you can win at the credit card game per se, but many people, they get into a habit of spending what they don't have,
Mm-hmm.
or they forget like, oh, wait, I forgot I had this credit card. And American Express is like, yeah, you didn't pay your credit card for 3 months. And you're like, yeah, now I took a ding on my credit score.
Yeah.
So now people are dealing with that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
Mm-hmm.
think this is more a societal thing than an issue with just an individual person? Like here in America, it seems like debt is one of those things that is so prominent. Like if you talk to someone, a commonality between the two people is going to be debt. Versus if you talk to someone in the Middle East, they're going to say, no, we were able to come up with the money somehow.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
is your take on that?
I mean, I do think across the board it is very societal. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, if you went to college, but I remember going to college and they had the tables set up. I went to college several years ago, and probably longer ago than you, but they had the table set up and they were throwing you the free t-shirts or the squeegee balls or whatever they were. And I meet with clients who are literally 40 years old and have been carrying some of that credit card debt
Mm.
over the years, right? Over the years, or the student loan debt. I think that's something that's relatively unique to our country, how much people can take on as far as student loan debt. And they're making those decisions often at 18, 19, 20 years old and not really understanding the implications of how they're going to pay that off down the road. And I also think in our society, it's just easier to get credit. We live on credit. We talk a lot about leveraging debt. And I don't think that we do a very good job, at least not in my experience, of educating. I want to say like our young children, but not even really that. It's like in high school, in college, and beyond that, we don't really do a very good job of prioritizing financial education. So I think that that's something that other cultures may be doing better, or maybe not giving out as much credit to people so that they can learn how to manage it at a smaller level than before it balloons and gets really big and has a bigger impact.
Mhm. And yeah, getting into that financial literacy for youth. I'm a former educator,
Okay.
taught K to 12,
Okay.
music, and then taught special education.
Okay.
So I am well versed in the sense of education,
Yeah.
knowing what works, what doesn't work, and then seeing the pitfalls of education. And financial literacy is one of them. Now, I was fortunate enough, I went to a private high school where we had an accounting class that I took. And I was able to get a good feel for money budgeting. And that led to me getting internships at Sikorsky. They build Black Hawk helicopters for the US Army.
Yeah.
And I did business finance there. And then I did accounting there. Now, that was good for me at age 18, 19, and making good money, able to see money in a sense as a whole, budgeting, all that stuff. But not many people get that. If you went to a trade school like my brother did, there was no accounting class, there was no finance class. So I wanted to talk to you about having the pros of having a finance class for our youth, and then maybe the cons if there are any.
I can't really see any cons, to be honest with you. And first of all, I want to say you're a bit of a unicorn in that you had that experience and that background. I know personally, like, honestly, I didn't get interested in finances until I was 35 years old. So I have a background in public health. I don't remember my parents ever talking about finances with us. My dad owned his own business, and I knew there were good months and I knew there were not so good months, but it was never something, I only knew that because of the tension in my parents' relationship, to be honest with you. And it's something my brothers and I would talk about, but it was never laid out on the table as far as what my parents were spending on things, what we could afford, what we couldn't afford. It was just like, if we could do it, we did it. And there was a lot of things that we didn't necessarily have. But I share that just to say, I took out whatever loans I could for college and just went forward with that. But it wasn't until I was married, had 2 young sons under the age of 2, that it was like, oh, wait a second, I want to actually be able to take some time off from work. And I can't do that. We don't have the finances to make that work for us. We didn't have the income coming in. My husband's also an educator, K through 12, and just living off his salary was not an option for us. So I share that, Michael, because that's what got me interested in personal finance. And what difference would it have made? I'm not really sure, because I love what I do now and I've been doing it for 8+ years. But at the same time, I think the earlier that we can talk to young people about finance, the better it is for them. Because sometimes people may realize that the way that they're seeing other people model money habits is not the only way. Because we see our parents, we see maybe aunts and uncles, we face family friends, and we think like, oh, that's how everyone manages money. I have a lot of clients whose parents took on debt, switched from one debt over to another debt. And they just thought like, that's how people do money. And I work with a lot of couples too. So often that's really fun when one person comes in and has a particular background, like for yours, for example, where you were very facile around numbers, had a lot of education around that. And then I have somebody else who doesn't have any of that experience and has just been winging it up to this point. So I don't know. Can you see any negatives to financial education starting at a young age? I've been teaching my boys since they were 4 and 6, and it seems to be helping them. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I see more pros and cons. I would say the only con would be a scarcity mindset forming, where if they believe that they can't afford something, maybe and then they say, well, I'm poor, I can't afford this. And then they start to look at other people's families who might be able to afford it. And then they associate that with them having less. And then that scarcity mindset comes in, and that leads to them not being able to saying, well, I can't be successful because this is my childhood. That leads to victim mentality. So it can be a cascading rainfall of negative things. But then, like I said, there's more pros and cons. So if we can have that child that we're raising focus more on the good and not so much on the negative, then it's going to be something that is going to be irrelevant. However, our world is so negative where that negativity is just going to pop up naturally. And for me, like growing up, money was tight, right? Even though my mom works, 3 jobs all the time. I never saw her really because she's always either at work or sleeping. And we had a deal, right? So it's three of us, including me. That was a lot on my parents, right? And I remember just, getting some birthday money, buying some candy, or saving up to buy a game or a toy, right? And now I think back all those years when I was younger, what would I have done differently if I had the same mindset that I do now, right? I wouldn't have bought all the M&Ms. I wouldn't have bought all the toys that I didn't even care about. That right there could have been used to invest. It could have been used to help pay off some of my college, because for me, I paid for my own college. I worked a full-time and a part-time job just to get me through college, right? So I worked hard, where some people might not have done that because they maybe had mom or dad help them, or they had a loan that they could take out and saying, okay, well, I'll deal with this later, right? So there's so much to financial literacy or financial education that plays a role when we're younger. And I think right now we have a dilemma because there's not so much cash money lying around anymore. When I was young, I can go on the sofa, I could find a couple quarters.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you go on my sofa, you're gonna find lint, right? There's no quarters in that sofa, right?
Yeah.
I have a little piggy bank. I'll, if I have any change, that for some reason, if I have change, I'll put it in the little piggy bank, right? But when I was younger, I could go around my house and scavenge for money. So the ice cream truck came rolling around. I'm looking in the sofa trying to get some ice cream. But now that's not there anymore. Everything's plastic, right? So a kid doesn't know, okay, well, how many dollars is this? How much change is this? So they have a vague sense of money.
Yeah.
But then they're not really focused on, well, this is going to cost me $5 of my dollars versus I have a credit card or a card or debit card that takes $5 away from me. But you don't necessarily know how much money is on there unless you always look at the end and say, okay, electronically, it says I have this much money left. Right. So now we're not getting that visual cue of how much money I have left versus if I had $10, I spent $2, I have $8 left.
Right.
Kids are not getting that anymore. Do you see an issue with that coming in the later generations?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we used to find quarters underneath my freezer. So I remember very specifically doing that with my brothers, hunting out for that. And I do have 11 and 13-year-old boys. So I'll just say a couple of things because people a lot of times will ask me, like, what are you teaching your kids about money? So one of the things that we do in our house on the refrigerator is come up with different tasks that our boys can do. And we actually attach money to it. So I'm a big proponent that like money comes from work. So my kids who are like, oh, well, so-and-so gets an allowance and well, they don't really have to do anything. They just get it. And I'm like, no, you don't get money just for being alive. I don't get money just for being alive. You need to do something. So we'll attach, for example, $3 to, walking the dog and feeding him or something like that, or $2 for vacuuming so that they get a sense like that money is tactile. Once they get, again, they're 11 and 13, maybe once they're 15, it'll be more into the cards. But at this point with them, up to, I think, at least 15, I'm not interested in them having any plastic. I want them to understand there is a finite amount of money that you are going to have. Even if you go out with your friends and I choose to give you $10 for that, you are going to be aware of how much is on there, as opposed to some of their friends who honestly will take a card and have no idea how much is on that, or their parents have shifted money over and they have no sense. So I think that's something you can do with your kids. Like, cash is not completely king anymore, but it's still out there. We have access to it, especially for our kids. I do think, though, that let me just say, as far as like adults go, and then we can like pull it back, because I think even for adults, honestly, Michael, this is a huge issue for them, that people will come to me and they're like, yeah, I'm really sure what my mortgage is. I'm really sure what my kid's tuition is. For example, my cell phone bill, my BG&E for us in Baltimore, but like my electric bill, but I have no idea how much I'm spending in the day-to-day. And even though their mortgage or car payment are often their biggest payments, they're not as stressful to them because they know when they're due and they know how much they're going to be due for, or, how much they have to pay for them, which tends to carry less stress or anxiety for them because they can plan for them. So I will often have people, yes, it is a plastic card, but I have them set up a second account that's called a spending account. And if they're paid twice a month and it's the 1st and the 15th, they will decide ahead of time how much they're going to move over, like a bill, like a fixed bill, like their mortgage, over to that spending account, and then only use the spending account card for the day-to-day spending. And I share that with you because honestly, I mean, I know we're talking about kids and we're talking about young people, but I'll sit with 40, 50, 30-year-olds and they're having the same issue, which is we're starting out the month. We know we're going to have this income, these expenses, and I'm sure we're going to have $870 at the end of the month to go towards debt, to go to a big purchase, to go towards our home savings. Then magically they get to the end of the month and there's $20 left in the account because everything is commingled. So I think one of the first steps for adults is separating that so that if they're married or they share their finances with someone, that both people are clear, listen, we're spending down this money, but it's not having an impact on our goals over here in the bill account. And that's the same thing that I would recommend to young people is if you are someone who is getting support from your parents, for example, because a lot of people get a certain amount of money when they're in college or on their own, have them send a certain amount over to that spending account. Or if you're doing that for, your teenagers, give them a set amount. I think there's a lot of things like Greenlight and things out there right now, but just be clear, it's a fixed amount. And you may choose, for example, if your parents give you $100 a month or you put in $100 a month, you may choose to spend $80 taking your friends out to Chipotle. But just know that that's what you have for that month or 2-week period. This is what's left over. I think that's the greatest exercise or tool or gift that we can give to young people and even to adults is there is a set amount. Figure out what your priorities are and spend in those first.
For me, everything is separated. It has to be, because if it's not, then I'm going crazy. Number one, we have a family account. So my wife and I have our name on the account, and that's where all the bills come from.
Yeah.
So electric bill, water bill, you name it. If it's a bill, it's coming from that account for the household.
Yeah.
And of course, I have my own personal account. My wife has her own personal account. And then since I have a business, I have a business account. And there's associated credit cards with everything.
Sure.
So I don't have a personal credit card. We have a family credit card. And then my business has business credit cards to get the most amount of points. So I have a food and gas card and then an everyday expense card. So all of that is separated. And every month at the end of the month, I'm saying, okay, this is how much I spent on this. And it's all compiled with the credit cards. So it makes it very simple for me for the business. Now, many people, they'll get one credit card because there's a rumor going around. You only need one credit card. Okay. I understand why you say that, right? It's easy to manage one credit card. When you have multiple credit cards, then it's more pieces moving where you're like, I have to worry about this. But it's easy when you have a family account, you know how much is going out. You already created a budget for everything, expenses. And for me, I did my budget a little bit differently. And maybe you can give me some advice. Is it wrong? Is it not good? Wrong? So I have a blanket statement of how to save without saying this is savings. So my electric bill average is going to be about $112 a month. I will budget $150. And then that extra money that I don't spend goes to savings at the end of the month. So it's kind of like I trick my mind because I say, well, it's $150 already spent on the electric bill.
Right.
But then it goes into savings. And then that savings can be used to down payment on a home, or if you need a new car, or if you want to go on vacation, whatever you decide for that money, for that savings is there. But I had to separate everything. And I think, you said you work with couples. How powerful is it to say you have your own account, she has her own account, and you have a together account, and then everything is going to be paid from that spending account versus you pay for half from yours, then she pays half from yours. No one knows where the money's going at that point. So then it's kind of like a guessing game. So I wanted to know, how can people begin to budget, right? What is the first step? Do you just look at all your bills and say, well, this is how much it costs? Do we give a little extra? Or do we say, well, this is defined cost, it's going to be defined cost?
Well, a couple of things. When I work with either an individual or couples, the first place I start with is why. because, there's a lot of shoulding out there of many things in life. I'm sure you would agree with that, but around finances in general, people will come to me and be like, well, we shouldn't be spending so much on food. We shouldn't be spending so much on going out to eat. And often there may be one person or the other person, if it is a couple, shoulding on themselves, the couple, or on each other about that. So I think it's really important when you're talking about finances to get clear about your why, because I like to say that should will never carry the day. Right. It might motivate you for like a month or two to like feel better about yourself that you save more money. But really, I think it has to be clearly attached to this is what I or we want for ourselves and our life. And that could be something that's very tangible. For example, saving for your kids' education, saving for a down payment for a house, saving for a home renovation, travel, whatever. Or it could be something that's not as tangible. Like, for example, I'll have clients who just say, we just don't want to fight as much about money. Right. Or I'll have someone come to me and say, I want to get better sleep. I have a lot of anxiety that maybe I'm not making the right decisions, and I'm not really clear if I am or I'm not, but that's something that I really want for myself and my life. So I always get sure to make clear with my clients from the get-go, from like our very first discovery call of like, why are we doing this? Because if it's not a compelling why, they won't continue with the habits that we create working together. So that's the first piece of it. There's another thing I just want to say, like sidebar, because I'm sure I'll say some things and not cover everything, but I just want to say that I do have a resource on my website that I call 3 Steps to a Better Budget. So, I often listen to podcasts personally when I'm driving my kids around or when I'm walking. So that's the kind of thing where people can like get it and dig into that if they want to. But creating that compelling why, I tend to think I'm all about like, if it's working for you, putting that money aside for those future savings. Listen, I am never here to say like, that's working for you, but I have a better way. Not really. I'm not really interested in that conversation. I'm more interested in a conversation of this isn't working for us, or we have a sense, or I have a sense that I could be doing better. Like, and I want to up level, for example. So if what you're doing, either you or whoever's listening, is working for you, like you don't necessarily have to mess with that. I do find though, for example, when you're talking about like a goal of a house down payment, I find that giving that goal a name and a particular purpose in your month-to-month budget is very important. So in my house, we lovingly call things like a house down payment or car repairs or travel or even Christmas, we call those whammies. So there are the things in life where you might go a few months and you don't have any of those, but then you have a month, for example, where your child breaks his right wrist for the 4th time and we've got medical expenses. Not that that's happened to me. Really, it was 6 times. But, or could be happier things like a vacation that you want to go on with your family next summer. Or it could be things like Christmas that people will say to me like, oh, Christmas just snuck up at me again. And then all of a sudden we had to put this money on a credit card and we weren't planned for it. So what I suggest, Michael, is that people determine what those quote unquote whammies are for them. Again, to your purpose of a house down payment, and they get clear about how much do we want to save and by when. And then, for example, let's make it easy and say car repairs, you spent $1,200 last year. I really recommend that people every month put aside $100 into a car repair fund. Or if it's tuition, it's going to be $3,600 for the year due August 1st. Put aside $300 every month into a tuition fund. I am a very big fan of separate savings accounts. I love the online banks. If you have a bank that lets you do that for free, great. Some credit unions do, but a lot of the brick and mortar banks want to charge you for every savings account you have. And I'm not here to pay banks more money. So what I like is like Ally or Capital One 360, where you can turn those whammies into a fixed expense. The same way I was talking about the spending account. I think it just makes it much easier when you look at your overall holistic financial picture, plan for the whammies of life, plan for the savings, for example. And my recommendation would be when you're talking about you and your wife, let's say, that you both get paid. I don't really care who gets paid what. I never say you make more than your wife makes more than you. You should put in 57% and you should put in 43. That always causes issues. So whatever I personally believe and recommend this to my clients, that the paychecks come into one account. And if you're going to put money into personal accounts, I call those blow dough accounts, for your personal separate, you and your wife, I would have that as a fixed bill. So let's say your income, the two of you together is, I don't know, $2,500 each per month. You have $5,000, you pay those set bills. the mortgage, the rent, the car payment, whatever, put a set amount of money into your spending account and a set amount of money into your personal accounts. That works for a lot of couples because they like to have the freedom in their own account to spend how they want to spend. But I wouldn't just willy-nilly put the money over there. I would turn that into a bill that you see the impact of putting money over there on your bigger plan. Because if you want to have that house down payment in 18 months, you better understand that putting $500 a month into each of your below accounts has an impact on that goal.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And everything you said was spot on too, where if we give the money that we get a name, a purpose, hey, guess what? Then we're going to say, okay, this money's for that versus, well, I'm looking at my account and I have $1,200. So what am I going to get? Versus if we already say, well, already $500 or $1,000 is going to the home expense, our dream home expense, guess what? We have $200 to work with. So giving it a name is powerful. And it's similar to like giving our goals a name, where we say, okay, I want to do this. I want to accomplish this. And this is just the name of the goal. Finance is the same thing. And many people don't get to that point in life and they just say, all right, well, I made this much money. I can spend this much money. And then we get into like taxes, right? 16-year-old finally goes to work and they get their first check and they're calculating, I made $12 an hour and I worked 15 hours and they think they're going to get that money. And they finally get their check. They're like, I got robbed. Right. Well, Uncle Sam wants his piece too. Right. And right now we're living in a high inflation type of environment where inflation currently is 8.3%. Phoenix, Arizona is like 11%. So it's high in certain areas. How can people combat this high inflation in our current living situation, if you want to call it that, and still be able to budget, still be able to save because their dollar is not going as far as it used to?
Yeah, I think more than anything else, honestly, the first step around all this, like I said, is the why, but the second step is really awareness. Truly it's awareness that that's happening. Unfortunately, hopefully your listeners weren't like, oh, she's going to give us a way to handle inflation, because I'm not.
No.
But I do think awareness is truly key, is understanding that that is happening. I mean, we even talk to our kids about it right now, just like inflation. What does that mean? How is that impacting us? We haven't seen that before, but like knowing that that's going on and not putting our heads in the sand and hoping that we're going to get through it. Right. So I think the first step around finances is so often, at least in my experience, and I've certainly been there myself, that like month to month, we're looking to survive. Whether that's people say paycheck to paycheck, but like we're really like surviving from one month to the next. And we're often looking in like that tunnel vision. So if you look online, I don't know if you've ever done this, I'm a dork. So I do things like, what's the best way to budget, or budgeting template, or how should I budget? Millions and millions of different hits out there. But they all basically say the same thing, which is here's your income, here's your expenses, and your quote unquote over or under for the month. And what I find is so often those are limited because they don't take into account the way that we spend money or the timing of how we spend money. And I share that because I think a lot of times people give up around budgeting, right? They know that inflation's happening. They start to get some awareness and then they're confronted because they're like, oh, this isn't working. And really it's not working because that type of budget is truly destined to fail, because we need a budget that truly takes us from where we are now to where we want to be down the road, right? That connects those everyday financial choices that we're making with those longer term goals. So for example, if somebody really needs a car and they're looking at what maybe their down payment will be, what their monthly payment will be, can we make it another year on this car, for example? They've got to be able to see not just, can I pay for it in this month? Or can we survive that payment, that monthly payment month to month? They need to be able to see, this is how it's going to impact that goal that we have. Again, let's go back to the house down payment 2 years down the road. So they need a much more expansive view of their budget, because that will help them to feel like they're actually on track and to shift from truly being at the effect, which is what I feel like a lot of us around inflation are right now. Like, oh, we're just at the effect of it. Like, it's just, oh, well, it's not my fault, and sure, it isn't your fault, but you got to be aware and responsible for it. And to shift from being at the effect of it to being at the cause is how much higher do I need to bring my awareness?
Mm.
And with that awareness, what shifts do we need to make sure that we're still on track to what our goals are? Maybe that's, for example, cutting back 25% going out this month.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that's, for example, saying no to one of our kids about doing some extra activity after school, for example. But we don't want to say no just to say no. We want to say no because inflation's happening and we have this goal and we want to stay on track to reach that goal. So you got to connect what your goals are, not just today, but to down the road as well.
Mm-hmm. It's all about the adjusting then,
Yeah.
where we say, okay, this is inflation and where can I cut back? And it's not so much, well, I'm going to stop going to Starbucks per se, because that's the idea of, okay, well, if we don't buy a coffee, we just make it at home, we can be a billionaire by the time we turn 65, right?
Right. Right.
Yes, you save some money, right? But what do you do with that $3.25? Typically, you're going to blow it somewhere else.
Right.
Many people don't say, okay, I'm going to use this money I saved on that Starbucks coffee and I'm going to put this towards savings or to some investment where it's going to grow, compound, and then it's going to be more when I'm 65. Many people don't do that. They say, I saved $3, I'm going to spend it somewhere different than a coffee.
Yeah.
Now we get into our current society, right? So playing perfect case scenario, right? We budgeted, we did all the right things. We don't have credit card debt. We are able to pay everything with cash. So we don't need credit cards per se. And we've been doing our best to save for a new dream home. And we wanted to get 20% down to avoid PMI. And we finally are about to get there. But then the housing market skyrockets. So now our 20% is no longer 20%. It might be 10%, maybe even less than that. What do you say about the idea of saving for 20%, trying to get into a home with a 15 fixed year mortgage versus a 30-year zero down? What's your take on that? Should people buy something that they can't afford, or should they wait until they can afford it and then purchase it?
Well, this feels like a leading question a little, but like, should people buy something they can't afford? No. I don't think necessarily, but a couple of things. I'm a big proponent of values-based budgeting. So, and I'm sure your listeners have heard of that before in some way, shape, or form. I like that expression of don't tell me what you value, show me your checkbook and your calendar, and I'll tell you what you value. What are you spending money on? What are you spending your time on? Indicates typically what we value. And one of the things that I do as I intake with different clients is their finances are personal to them, but they're not personal to me. So I have an objective viewpoint that is, okay, these are the things you told me you value, but you said you value vacations and trips with your family, and yet you didn't spend any money on that last year. So often the things that we say we value, we're not necessarily putting our resources, time, and money and energy towards those. So that's just like one thing to highlight for folks. And I don't think there's a one size fits all. Often people will say to me, well, what percentage should I put towards my house? And I'll say, it's got to be holistic. How does that monthly payment impact what your overall goals are? For example, maybe for some family, they're okay with putting 40, 50% of their take home towards a house for them because the value that house represents for them. Maybe they're having a family member move in who can help take care of their kids, for example, or maybe that puts them into a good school district and they don't have to pay for private school. So again, it's not only 25% should go towards that. It's like, what are your values and how does that impact the bigger picture? It's tricky right now, obviously, with home prices increasing. I feel for people, many of whom are clients, come to me saying, like, how do we make this work for ourselves to buy a home? The problem is a lot of people are getting pushed out of rental markets. I have clients in Florida and literally their rents are twice as much as they were the year before. So it's not it's not the same answer for everyone, but I want to say a couple of things. Like 20% down is a fantastic goal for folks, but I want to point out that you cannot have PMI even if you put down less than 20%. There are particular, how do you say it? Like where you can pay up front to have your PMI dropped. So I wouldn't advise it to someone who plans to stay in a home for fewer than 5 years, but there are plans that are out there. There are mortgage brokers who are very skilled at this. My husband and I did not do this for our first house. And we learned the hard way what PMI was. We bought a house in 2006 and 2 years later in 2008, it had dropped over 50% of its value. And it was a 12-foot wide row home, and we didn't have kids in it when we bought it. So I just share that to say, like, you never know what's coming next with the housing market. If we had known that you could pay in advance to drop that PMI, it might have been a good option for us at that time. So I just want to point that out there. Like, it isn't a one size fits all. And I do think a 15-year mortgage is an admirable goal, but I don't think you have to have that, again, in order to get in a home, if it allows you to check some of the other boxes that are important to you. You know, if you're interested in having more outdoor space or safety, or again, the schools or space for family members to come and stay with you, sometimes I think that outweighs some of that need to have that 15-year 20% down. So I think it's unique to every person. And just as mortgage rates are going up, they will come back down, and you will be able to refinance your home and take advantage of that down the road. So if someone has the option right now, I'm like, I try to hold off if you can for another year. But if you don't, it doesn't mean that you're completely messed up for the rest of your life either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the housing market is always going to fluctuate. It's going to go up, it's going to down, it's going to correct itself.
Yep.
And right now, I think many people were purchasing homes right before and during the pandemic. They were operating under that scarcity mindset. There's not enough homes to go around. I need to get me one quick. And then also the other factor was interest rates were so low, I would be silly not to get a home.
Yes.
So everyone's getting a home. Then people are moving to different areas. For example, California, they're moving over to Texas, right? And then they have a higher income in California. And so they can purchase a home here in Texas, and they can pay $50,000 over, and it's nothing to them.
Yep.
For us now, it's like, okay, now our home is worth $400,000 more, and that's property tax for us. So it's kind of like, well, we don't want our home to be worth $700,000. We want our home to be worth $250,000, right? Call it a day, because then our property taxes could be lower. So I think people, they see their home as an investment, which it can be, right? But many people choose to live in their home, not to make their home an investment. Now, if you could have your home and you have extra rooms, you want to rent out a room, then your home is going to be an investment, right? I know there's certain programs where if you have a garage you don't use space, you can use that, and people can rent that out, right? So now your home is some type of investment. Many people just live in their home. And for people wanting to buy a home now, just ask yourself, how long are you going to live in that home? Right? Is this a starter home, or is this going to be a home you're going to be in for a long term? And if you're going to be in this home for 30 plus years, you don't necessarily have to worry, right? Because even if it's worth a crazy amount of money today, with time, yes, your home is going to either reach that value again, or it's going to be even more. So we do have to understand that. And I think many people are still operating under the scarcity mindset, and they're trying to buy up homes. And that's why homes are so expensive right now. But eventually people are going to get their fill in homes, or people are not going to be able to pay for their homes. And then it's going to be a massive foreclosure going on. So there's so many different things that can go on, and having a coach like you to help them budget, to help them prepare, I think is so important, because when we don't prepare, something can happen. For example, another broke wrist. I wasn't prepared for that. And now credit card debt, and we have to pay 22% on whatever that borrowed money was. So it leaves us in a hole per se. And we do have to understand, being financially literate is going to be a good thing rather than a bad thing. And the better grasp you have on your funds, your money, your income, the better you're going to be able to be equipped to handle any issues you have in the future. And then you can say, okay, I can do this in so long, right? So many people want instant gratification, but if you do have a coach, they can say, well, we can make a plan, and you can go on vacation and you don't have to come back with credit card debt. You can go on vacation, enjoy stress-free, come home stress-free. Many people think they have to go on vacation to get rid of the stress, but then they're coming home with more stress because they spent a couple $1,000s on the vacation, and now it's on their credit card, and they're trying to figure out how to get rid of that. So there's so much to finance. There's so much to being literate with money, and it starts at a young age, but it doesn't stop there. It goes all the way to adulthood. And what I want from you is to give some final words, and then tell people where they can find you.
Sure. So a lot of what you just shared had me, the word that kept coming up in my mind is options. Because I'll typically say to people, I don't think it's actually about having more money. Although I'm all about my clients having more money, I think it's about creating more options. Because even to your point of buying a home and thinking, oh, I'm going to be in it for 30 years, for example, that's great. But the reality is Americans move. There's jobs all over the place. There's opportunities. So even if it's not related to home, like I just want to make sure that people are managing their finances so that they can say yes to those options that are created in the future. When people have an emergency fund, or I call it like an income replacement fund, if a job becomes available, if starting a business like yours is something that they're passionate about, they're able to say a bold yes to that because they've created that as an option, where so many people in life, again, are just like surviving and don't have those options. So I think that's the biggest motivation around becoming financially literate, bringing up your awareness, and listening to podcasts like this one. Honestly, just reading books is so that you can create those options for yourself. And then the best place to find me really is on my website, or you can find me on any social media. I'm Amy Scott Financial Coaching.
All right, perfect. All her descriptions are going to be in the description box below. So you can find her website, social media, and you can follow her, stay in touch with all her new articles she comes out for budgeting, money, anything related to that, because in a sense, we all need someone on our side to help us with our finances. And you might think you're okay right now, but if you have someone there in your corner to help you see your blind spots, you're going to be in a better place in the future. Amy Scott, everyone.